The wind on the high ridge wasn't just wind. It was a hungry thing. It clawed at the logs of Elias Vance's cabin, moaning like something lost and starving. For Elias, it was just company, the only company he wanted. He'd built his fortress of silence with his own two hands, high above the smudge of a town they called Redemption. He chose the spot because it was hard to get to. He chose it because he didn't want visitors. Ever. The world had seen his face and flinched. So he'd turned his back on the world. The left side of his face was a road map of old pain, a ruin of melted flesh from a fire long ago. It had taken his cheek, his ear, and pulled the corner of his eye into a permanent, horrifying grin. The man he was before the fire was a ghost. Now, he was just the monster on the mountain. A story parents told their kids to make them behave. He lived by the axe and the trap. He spoke to no one. The quiet was his punishment. The solitude was his shield. Inside, his world was small: a hearth, a table, a chair. He craved control over the little things because the big things had been stolen from him. The sky outside was turning a deep, angry purple. A storm was coming. He had wood. He had meat. He was ready. He was always ready for the wild. It was the cruelty of people he couldn't prepare for. Miles away, on a road that was more mud than dirt, Clara Hale was learning about a different kind of darkness, not just the absence of light. Her blindness was a heavy blanket, smothering everything she'd ever known. A fever had stolen her sight 9 months ago, leaving her in a world of sound and touch and fear. She sat on the wagon seat, her hands clenched tight. Her brother-in-law, Walter, was taking her to Redemption, dumping her on an aunt she barely remembered. She wasn't family, she was cargo. Postage due. Walter's charity had run dry. Almost there, he grumbled. He spoke to her like she was a child, not just blind. The condescension stung. She didn't answer, just tilted her face to the wind. It smelled of pine and cold rain. The first crack of thunder hit like a fist. The horses screamed. Walter cursed, a sound like a whip crack. The wagon lurched, a sound of splintering wood, and then a violent, gut-wrenching jolt. She was airborne. She landed hard, the breath knocked out of her in a single, searing flash of pain. The world was chaos. Walter shouting, horses screaming, the wagon crashing, tumbling, breaking apart. And then, silence. A silence so deep it was terrifying. "Walter?" she called out, her voice a thin reed in the wind. Nothing. Only the wind. She pushed herself up, her hands sinking into cold mud. A sharp pain shot through her ankle. "Walter!" she screamed, panic clawing at her throat. The only answer was the groan of the pines and the first cold drops of rain on her face. She was alone, blind, injured, and alone, with a monster of a storm about to break. Elias was locking down the shutters when he heard it. A cry, thin and desperate, tangled in the shriek of the wind. He froze. He knew the wind played tricks. It could sound like a woman crying or a man screaming. But this was different. This was real. He told himself to ignore it. It wasn't his business. The world could solve its own problems. He'd learned that the hard way. He turned back to the warmth of his fire. But he heard it again. Clearer this time. A woman's voice. Cursing, he grabbed his oilskin coat and his rifle. He didn't want to do this. Every part of him screamed to stay inside, to lock the door and feed the fire. But a ghost inside him stirred. The ghost of the man who ran into a burning building to save a child. A man he thought had died in that fire. He stepped out into the howling storm. Rain, cold as ice, lashed his face. He followed the sound, his boots sucking at the mud. He found the wagon first, or what was left of it. A splintered wheel here, a broken axle there. The dark shapes of 2 horses, their necks bent at impossible angles, tangled in their harnesses. But there was no sign of the driver, no Walter. Then he saw her. A small figure huddled under a pine tree, shaking. He walked slow, deliberate. He didn't want to scare her. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice a low growl, rough from years of not using it. She flinched like he'd struck her. She scrambled back, a small cry of pain escaping her as she put weight on her bad ankle. "Who's there?" She trembled. "Name's Elias," he said, keeping a careful distance. "Saw your wagon." He scanned the wreckage again. The way the axle was broken. It didn't look right. It looked less like an accident and more like sabotage. "Are you alone?" "My brother-in-law, Walter. He was here," she stammered. "I don't know what happened." Her head was turned just a little to his left. Her eyes were open, but they were staring at a point somewhere over his shoulder. They were vacant, unseeing. And then it hit him. A shock that went all the way to his bones. She wasn't looking past him. She couldn't see him. She couldn't see the monster. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't a freak. He was just a man. The realization was so powerful, it almost knocked him off his feet. She couldn't see the twisted, puckered flesh. She couldn't see the face that made children cry and women gasp. In her world of darkness, he was just a voice in a storm. "You're hurt," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Her ankle was already swelling, dark against her pale skin. "This storm, it's just getting started. You'll die out here." He took a step closer. "My cabin is near. It's warm." Trust him? A stranger with a voice like grinding rocks who lived alone on a mountain? Every instinct she had screamed no. But the cold was a physical thing now, sinking its teeth into her. Freezing to death was the only other option. I can't walk," she said, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. He didn't hesitate. "I can carry you." He closed the distance between them. Rain dripped from his hat. He was just a man offering shelter. It was a feeling he'd forgotten he could have. He gently took her arm. She flinched, but didn't pull away. Her skin was like ice. "All right," she whispered. It was a surrender. He bent down and scooped her into his arms. She was so light. As he lifted her, her head came to rest against his chest. She was so close. Close enough to trace every scar with her fingertips if she could see. But her eyes just stared blankly into the rain. He held his breath, a strange, powerful mix of relief and something else, something he hadn't felt in a very, very long time. He turned and started the climb back to his cabin, carrying the first piece of the outside world he had allowed into his fortress in a decade. The climb was a fight. Elias shielded her with his own body, his back taking the full force of the wind. She was quiet in his arms, a small, trembling bundle of fear and cold. He could feel the tremors running through her. He knew this path by heart, every rock, every root. It was as familiar to him as the scars on his own face. For Clara, it was a swirl of sensations. The rough coat against her cheek, the steady, powerful thump of his heart against her ear. He smelled of pine and wet earth and wood smoke. A man's smell. A safe smell. He kicked the cabin door open and carried her inside. The wave of warmth that hit her was so intense, so comforting, it almost made her cry. He set her down gently in the single chair by the fire. The fire crackled and spit, and she could feel its heat on her face like a soft caress. "I'll get you a blanket," he said. His voice was different in here. Softer, less like rocks grinding together. She heard his heavy boots on the floorboards, the sound of a chest opening, and then he was back. He draped a heavy wool blanket over her shoulders. It smelled of cedar. For a long time, the only sounds were the storm raging outside and the fire crackling inside. It wasn't the empty silence Elias was used to. This silence was full of another person's presence. It was full of questions. He watched her. He was used to being stared at, but this was different. Her unseeing gaze was unnerving. She was studying him, but with senses he couldn't hide from. She listened. She built a map of the room in her mind from the sounds, the drip of water from his coat, the sigh of the logs in the fire, the soft rustle of his clothes as he moved. He was a big man, she had felt that, but he moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. Not a clumsy beast, but something contained. "Your ankle," he finally said, breaking the quiet. "I should look at it." She tensed. "It's fine." "No," he said, and his tone left no room to argue. "It's swelling." He knelt in front of her. The sound was so close, so intimate. She pulled the blanket tighter. "I won't hurt you," he said, his voice low and steady. She gave a small, jerky nod. He gently lifted the hem of her wet dress. His fingers were calloused and rough, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he probed her swollen ankle. She winced. "Not broken," he said after a moment. "Badly sprained. I'll wrap it." He moved away, and she heard the clink of a bottle, the rip of clean cloth. He knelt before her again, and the sharp, medicinal scent of liniment filled the air. As he worked, binding her ankle with firm, efficient motions, his closeness was overwhelming. She could feel the heat of his body, hear the quiet rhythm of his breathing. This stranger was showing her more focused care than her own family had in months. "What is your name?" she whispered. "Elias. Your full name." He stopped working for a second. "Elias Vance." "I am Clara Hale," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Vance." "Just Elias," he grunted, tying off the bandage. He stayed there, kneeling for a moment too long. In the firelight, he studied her face. She was young, maybe 20. Her face was pale, with fine bones. Mud was smudged on her cheek. Without thinking, he reached out his thumb and gently brushed it away. She went completely still. It wasn't like when he'd touched her ankle. This was different, personal. She didn't pull away, but he felt her breath catch. He felt the rough pad of his thumb on her soft skin. Elias snatched his hand back like he'd been burned. What was he thinking? He was a monster. He'd forgotten himself. He stood up abruptly. "You're hungry," he said, his voice gruff again, the wall slamming back into place. "I have stew." He turned his back on her, busying himself at the fire, his heart hammering in his chest. A simple touch had belonged to a world that no longer existed for him. The storm trapped them for 2 days. Time became a strange, blurry thing, measured only by the feeding of the fire and the quiet meals they shared. The tension between them slowly started to melt away. Elias learned that Clara was not helpless. She insisted on helping. She polished his few forks and spoons until they shone, her delicate fingers finding every spot of tarnish. She learned the layout of the cabin, navigating the small space with a confidence that surprised him. Her presence filled the silence with small, human sounds, the soft rustle of her dress, the quiet tune she hummed to herself. Clara learned Elias through his sounds, the slow, deep rhythm of his breathing when he was thinking, the tired sigh he let out when he sat down at the end of the day. He was a man of routine, a man who rarely spoke, but she started to hear things beneath the surface of his gruff words, a deep weariness, a hidden gentleness. On the second day, she was sitting by the fire. "Elias," she said softly. He was sharpening his knife by the window, the scrape of steel on stone the only sound. "Yes." "What does the storm look like?" He stopped. It was a strange question. No one had ever asked him to describe the world before. He looked out the window, really looked. "It's white," he began, his voice rough. "The snow is so thick you can't see the trees. The wind is piling it up against the walls. It's like the whole world has been erased." She smiled, a sad, small smile. "I remember snow." An impulse, as sudden and strange as the one that made him touch her face, took hold of him. "It's not silent," he said, his voice dropping low. "The wind, it howls, and the snow isn't just white. Where the light from the window hits it, it's almost blue." He stopped, embarrassed by his own words. But Clara turned her unseeing eyes toward him, her expression full of wonder. "Blue," she whispered. "Thank you. I can almost see it." Something shifted between them then. A lock turned. Later that night, as he was banking the fire, she asked another question. "How did it happen?" He froze, his back to her. He knew what she meant. The old shame washed over him, but her voice wasn't morbid. It was just a question. She couldn't see him. She just wanted the story. "A fire," he said, his voice flat. "Boarding house. Years ago. I was getting a little girl out." "Did you?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Yes," he said. "She got out fine." He didn't tell her the rest. He didn't tell her that the girl's mother had screamed when she saw his face, that the town he'd saved had rewarded him with whispers and averted eyes. He didn't have to. Clara heard the silence between his words. She heard what it had cost him. "You were brave," she said softly. He turned and looked at her. Her face held no pity, no disgust, just a simple statement of fact. For the first time in 10 years, someone had looked past the monster and seen the man, and she'd done it without her eyes. A crack formed in the wall around his heart. A tiny sliver of light got in. He didn't say anything, just retreated to his side of the room. But for the first time in a long, long time, the silence in the cabin felt like peace. On the third morning, the storm was over. The world was buried in a thick, pristine blanket of snow, dazzling in the morning sun. "It's over," Elias said. Clara stood, testing her ankle. It was still sore, but better. "My aunt," she said, though a part of her dreaded leaving this small, quiet cabin. "She'll be worried." "The town is half a day's walk in this," he said. "Longer for you. I'll take you." The journey to redemption was slow. Elias walked ahead, carving a path through the snow, constantly turning back to offer her his hand. He described the world to her as they walked. "The snow is heavy on the pine branches," he said, his voice losing its harsh edge. "Makes them hang low like they're bowing." He paused. "There's a cardinal in a birch tree. A flash of red against all the white. It's beautiful." Clara smiled, holding his arm tight. "You have a poet's soul, Elias Vance." He just grunted, but a warmth spread through his chest. He was seeing the world again, through her, noticing things he'd long since forgotten how to see. They reached the edge of town as the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. People stopped and stared. They saw the mountain hermit, the monster, walking with a strange, beautiful woman on his arm. Whispers followed them like ghosts. Elias felt the old shame rising in his throat. He pulled his hat down low. Suddenly, a man stepped out of the mercantile, blocking their path. He was handsome, well-dressed, and his face was a mask of outrage. "Clara! My God, we thought you were dead!" Clara recognized the voice. "Mr. Prescott." Arthur Prescott's eyes raked over her, then landed on Elias. His face twisted in disgust. "What is the meaning of this? What has this creature done to you?" Elias froze. The word creature hit him like a punch to the gut. It was the voice of the world, reminding him of his place. "Mr. Prescott, this is Mr. Vance," Clara said, her voice surprisingly strong. "He saved my life." Prescott ignored her. His eyes were locked on Elias's scars. "He took you to his lair, unchaperoned? The man is a menace. Everyone knows it. You must come with me at once. Your aunt is beside herself." He reached for her arm, to pull her away. But Clara stepped back. She pulled her arm from Prescott's grasp and moved closer to Elias's side. It was a small movement, but to Elias, it was everything. She was choosing him. "I am fine, Arthur," she said, her voice cold. "Mr. Vance has been a gentleman." Prescott scoffed. A gentleman? Look at him, Clara. If only you could see. The man is a monster. He's taken advantage of you. He leaned in, his voice a poisonous whisper. His face is a horror. He probably held you prisoner. But Clara had listened to Elias's breathing in the dark. She had heard him describe a red bird against the snow. She knew the man. His face, she said, her voice ringing with a fierce clarity that made Prescott flinch, is of no concern to me. I have been shown more kindness by this monster in 2 days than I have from this town my entire life. She took Elias's arm. Take me to my aunt's house, please, she said, just for him. Stunned, Elias led her away, leaving Prescott standing speechless in the street. For the first time, the stares of the town didn't feel so sharp. They weren't just aimed at him anymore. They were aimed at them. And in that, he found a strange, new strength. He walked her to a small, neat house at the edge of town. An anxious-looking woman, her Aunt Martha, rushed out. The reunion was tearful and frantic. Elias stood back, feeling like a bear in a dollhouse. Martha finally turned to him, her eyes wide with a mix of gratitude and fear as she took in his face. We are in your debt, Mr. Vance, she stammered. There's no debt, Elias said flatly. He looked at Clara, a deep sense of loss already settling over him. He had brought her back to her world. He had to go back to his, back to the silence. But the silence seemed different now, empty. Thank you, Elias, Clara said softly. He just nodded, unable to speak, and turned and walked away. The crunch of his boots in the snow was the only sound. The next few days were hell for both of them. Clara's aunt treated her like she was made of glass. The town, stirred up by Prescott's gossip, whispered about her. The fallen woman, tainted by the mountain man. She missed the cabin. She missed Elias's quiet strength. She missed his voice describing the world. For Elias, the cabin was a cage. It was haunted by her presence, the spoon she'd polished, the faint scent of lavender that lingered in the air. The silence was deafening now. It taunted him. He couldn't even look at a sunset without thinking of how he'd described it to her. One evening, Arthur Prescott came to call. He brought flowers, and he brought a proposition. He offered to marry Clara. It would be the Christian thing to do, he said, loud enough for her to hear from the next room. To give you my name, protect you. No one else will have you now, not after him. Clara felt a cold rage. He wasn't offering marriage, he was offering a cage. He wanted to own the poor, blind girl as a trophy of his own goodness. She walked into the parlor. Thank you for your offer, Mr. Prescott, she said, her voice like ice. But I must decline. Her aunt gasped. Clara, be reasonable. He is offering me a prison, Clara said. I will not be your act of charity. She turned her unseeing eyes toward Prescott. I would rather live alone in darkness for the rest of my life than be your wife. The next morning, before dawn, Clara packed a small bag. She left a note for her aunt and slipped out of the house. Using a branch as a walking stick, she started walking. She knew the direction of the mountain. She could feel the rising sun on her right cheek. She was terrified, and she had never felt so alive. She was going home. It was almost dusk when Elias saw it, a small, dark shape, moving slowly but steadily up the path to his cabin. He grabbed his rifle, instinct taking over. Then he recognized the set of her shoulders, the way she held her head. It was Clara. He ran. His heart hammered against his ribs as he covered the snow-covered ground. Clara! He cried as he reached her. What are you doing? She was exhausted, her face flushed from the cold, but she was smiling. I came back, she said. It was that simple. But your aunt, the town, he stammered, completely lost. The town is not my home, she said, her voice firm. My aunt sees a burden. Prescott sees a charity case. She took a breath. You were the only one who saw me. He just stood there, speechless. The world had cast her aside, and she had walked all the way back to him, to the monster. An emotion so powerful it almost buckled his knees, washed over him. She was choosing him. Then he saw it. Movement further down the path. Prescott, on horseback, and 2 other men with him. They'd come for her. "Clara!" Prescott yelled, his face a storm cloud of rage. "Get away from him! You've lost your mind!" Elias moved, putting his body between her and them. "She is here because she chooses to be," he growled. "You have no claim on her." "She's a helpless, blind woman!" Prescott spat, dismounting. "This beast has bewitched her! I'm taking her back!" He started forward, but Clara's voice stopped him dead. "No!" She stepped out from behind Elias. She reached out, her hand finding his, her fingers lacing through his. Her touch was an anchor, a declaration. "My blindness does not make me helpless, Arthur. In fact, it has allowed me to see things more clearly than you ever will." She stood tall. "I see a cruel, vain man who uses pity as a weapon." Then she turned her face up toward Elias. "And I see a man who is brave and kind and honorable, a man who showed me a red bird in a snow-covered tree." Tears stung Elias's eyes. Her words were healing wounds he thought he'd carry forever. He looked down at her fierce, beautiful face. He saw his home. He knew what he had to do. He slowly let go of her hand, and in front of the men from the town, he knelt in the snow. He took her hand again, pressing it to his lips. He looked up at her, his scarred face open and vulnerable for all the world to see. "Clara Hale," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have nothing to offer you but this cabin and a quiet life. I am not a handsome man. The world sees a monster." He paused, his gaze locked on her. "But I can be your eyes. I can describe every sunrise. I will keep you safe. I will be your protector, if you will be my beauty." Clara's breath caught in her throat. A single tear ran down her cheek. He wasn't asking her to ignore his scars. He was asking her to be the beauty that made them unimportant. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "Oh, Elias, yes." The 2 men with Prescott looked away, embarrassed. They saw it then. Not a monster and his victim, but 2 whole people, finding each other. Prescott stood frozen, defeated not by force, but by a love he could never understand. He turned, got on his horse, and rode away. Elias rose to his feet. He gently cupped her face in his hands. He was no longer Elias Vance, the hermit. She was no longer Clara Hale, the blind girl. They were just Elias and Clara. The years that followed were quiet, but never silent. The cabin became a home, filled with peace. He kept his promise. He was her eyes. He described the world in all its beauty, and she, in turn, was his. She filled their home with song and laughter. She would trace the lines on his face with her fingers, not with pity, but with love, learning the map of his courage. They were 2 broken pieces that, together, had become whole. The world in redemption could whisper all it wanted. But on their mountain, they had built a world of their own, a world founded not on what you see, but on what you feel. He was her sight, and she was his salvation. If you enjoyed this story, and believe that true love sees with the heart, don't forget to subscribe. You never know what you might find hidden away in the dark.